Everyone, thank you for joining the webinar today. And if you are here for the replay, welcome to the replay. So today we're going to be chatting with Zachary Gordon, who is a senior manager in the accounting services group at Grassi Accounting, and he's also a leader of the firm's cannabis advisory practice. And Zach's going to be chatting about his insights on best practices to better run your dispensary. So if you're a dispensary owner and you're interested in learning on how you can maximize tax savings, manage cash flow, and other important business decisions to help you increase profits, you've come to the right place. I'm Stephanie, and I'll be hosting the webinar today, and I'm the content marketing manager at KayaPush. If you haven't heard of KayaPush helps dispensary owners grow and scale their operations by simplifying and integrating HR, payroll, and workforce management tasks, including scheduling and time tracking. And we have an all-in-one software solution that we do that from. And having an all-in-one solution allows you to do things like streamline approved clocked-in hours directly to payroll. KayaPush also integrates with leading dispensary POS systems to help you run a really compliant operation. And it also allows you to measure things like sales versus labor from the same platform or create schedules based on forecasted sales. And employees can clock in through your POS as well with that feature. So KayaPush is an all-in-one software solution. And as a store owner, if you use that, you can manage your store and sales and people in person, remotely, and you can also manage multiple locations at once. And the reason we are here today is because our goal is to help make things easy for dispensary owners. So to help them succeed at what they do, we wanted to put the spotlight on Zachary from Grassi to help dispensary owners succeed because he has so much knowledge in some really complex areas of this industry. So I'm going to chat a little modest. I'm going to chat a little bit more about Zachary today, just give a bio. So meet Zach. Zachary Gordon is a senior manager in the accounting services group at Grassi and a leader of the firm's cannabis advisory practice. And within the cannabis industry, Zach focuses on 280E tax planning and optimization, financial modeling and analytics, license applications, and business structuring and transaction support. Zach has also advised clients in real estate, healthcare, crypto, nonprofit, fintech, media, and consumer goods sectors. So a breadth of knowledge. Zach has also served in various leadership roles, including co-leader of the cannabis practice at a regional public accounting firm and controller, auditor, and director of finance and operations for several startups. So he really knows what he's talking about. And he's also a frequent author and speaker and has been published in places like Accounting Today, CPA Trendlines, Cannabis Industry Journal, Tax Stringer, Law 360, and even Yahoo Finance. Zach also sits on the NYSS CPA Cannabis Technology Assurance Committee and banking committees, as well as the AICPA Cannabis Committee, and was chair of the NYSS CPA Cannabis Industry Committee for 3 terms and was named the Society's inaugural 40 Under 40 in 2020. So if that's not enough to convince you, he's an expert in his field. I don't know what is. We're very lucky to have him. I'll do a quick Grassi intro. So Zach is here today representing the Grassi firm. Grassi is the 64th largest firm in the US. It's a premier professional service organization specializing in accounting, auditing, tax, technology, and business consulting services. You can see all the services listed at the bottom there. Many services helping people within the industry. And Grassi has offices across 4 different states, as well as internationally through its association with More Global. And the dedicated Grassi team works closely with clients to find strategic solutions to business challenges in order to help companies and dispensaries maximize their potential. One other order of business, if you are in the Vegas area or if you are going to MJ BizCon, come and visit us. We're both going to be there. These are our booth numbers. So if you want to meet either of us in person and you have more questions, come check us out. We will send this up in a follow-up email as well. So that was a lot, and we're going to jump into the webinar content now. I'm going to let Zach start us off and take it away. He's going to be sharing a lot of his knowledge on these 4 topics, and I'm going to be asking some questions with Zach so we can learn a little bit more about all these different areas.
All right, Steph, thanks so much for that intro. I hope I could live up to that. I mean, my goodness, it's, it's a lot when you hear it put up like that. Oh, but who wrote that stuff? Um, so, as alluded, I've been around the cannabis industry for quite a few years now. I actually got into it purely by chance. So, uh, as you might have heard in that ridiculous introduction, I do have a bit of an entrepreneurial background. Long story short, wound up into WeWork, and in the office next to mine was a retired Wall Street professional who was deploying capital into the cannabis space. And we hit it off, and uh, I was able to actually get my hands dirty very early on. And this is circa 2016. So at that point, the guidance was fresh at best, if we're being generous here. Even now, the roadmap to properly operate a cannabis business is still, let's say, murky. So what we want to talk about are a couple of key areas that really can help set forward as best as possible a clean, efficient operation and help to avoid some of the pitfalls that frankly, any business, but especially cannabis business, can run into. So just some of the key areas here: documentation. And if you know me, you'll know I repeat this phrase over and over again, but write it down. If you can't prove something in writing, it may as well not exist. And that's not just me talking, that's every authority figure from the IRS to state departments of taxation to different cannabis authorities to investors and everybody in between. So we'll dive into this a bit more, but write things down. There are some key areas as well when it comes to managing risk. And one of those things that we really want to talk about are how do you minimize the damage that fines, penalties, and just any sort of negative attention can cause. No one wants to write any checks if they don't have to. No one wants to have that extra expense that they don't need to. We'll talk a bit about that. Needless to say, tax law is complicated. And that's a very loaded statement. But from 280E to some of the more particular state level tax guidelines, there's a lot there. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But it's so easy to get tripped up by some of these things. And you'll notice I'll talk about documentation there as well. But there's a lot to think about. And then we get into some of the more fun stuff on the analytics side. You have everything you need in front of you as far as analytics are concerned. If you have any sort of software, you have access to data. And we'll talk about just what you can do with that and why it's important. So when we talk about proper documentation, as I said, write it down. It doesn't get any more clear than that. So you see a few examples written out here, but cash, accounts payable, accounts receivable, most importantly, cost of goods sold. If we're looking at a tax return, for example, we want to see what can be deducted or how are you getting to those numbers. You can have an absolutely perfect situation, but if you don't have that written policy, it becomes much more difficult should someone challenge it. So, Steph, any questions that come to mind at this point?
Why would you say documentation is so important?
Prove it. That's the most simple way I can put it. That prove that you're doing things a certain way. So, for example, again, you can have an inventory item that can be, allocated to cost of goods sold, but if you don't have a written policy for how you are allocating that, then really, it's theoretically a third party comes in and has no idea how you got there. So having that written roadmap can make all the difference in the world.
In terms of learning about policies and procedures, how would you access policies and procedures to know where to start?
Starting is the most difficult part, to be honest. And this isn't just a cannabis thing, this is just in general. We do a lot of things, not mindlessly, but they become habits, good or bad. They become just things that happen, frankly. So it's a matter of taking a step back and really thinking, okay, well, I have to go pay this bill. How do I do it? Who's doing what? And it's theoretically as easy, sometimes easier said than done, but as easy as sitting down with a team and saying, okay, so in any given day or any given month, what do you do? The accounts payable person, for example. Okay, so a bill comes in. Is it coming in by paper? Is it coming in by mail? Or is it coming in by email? Who has to approve it? Who's signing off? Who sends the Is there a physical check? Is there a wire? Et cetera, et cetera. And when you get into something more nuanced, like cost of goods sold, for example, that's a matter of taking a look at the inventory management software, the seat to sale software, for example, and making sure things make sense. So what was the inventory that was taken in? Who was responsible for that? Who's keeping track of the reporting? Who's filing the reporting? Most important enough on that front. And then how are we finishing up that process? So just, it sounds silly, but what do you do in a given day? It starts there.
So it would be like creating
and honestly, it's a good exercise for anybody. Let's be honest.
Would it be like creating a standard operating procedure around how to keep track of all these different pieces?
Exactly. So even taking a step back from this being cannabis, you're looking at a retail operation. There are minor variations in how you do things, but at the end of the day, you are still running a retail business. You just still need to understand what's your cost of inventory. Yes, the comment just came in, a very good one. I agree with that, Dorothy. You absolutely need to track the cost of inventory. That might have come up once or twice in some work that we've seen in the past. But it's as simple as that. Just being, frankly, honest with yourself about who's doing what, how it's getting done, and trying to stick to a schedule as well.
Okay. So would an example, can you give like an example of what a policy might look like in practice?
Absolutely. So let's just take, for example, cash. This is a very cash intensive business, as I'm sure if you're on the line here, you're very aware of that. So having that cash policy written down. So customer comes in, they buy XYZ. Cash goes into the register. What happens next? So being able to hold the person at the cash register responsible for, doing the daily count or multiple times per day, depending on volume. Let's not get too deep into the weeds on that one, farm the fun. So counting the cash. Then, so who's handling the cash from there? So then it goes into the back, there's a safe, goes to the safe, who's counting the safe? Who's managing when the bank sends the armored car in? Who's managing that process? Who's taking the cash to the armored car? Who's checking to make sure that the armored car arrives at the facility, et cetera, et cetera. So that slightly oversimplifies, looking at a cash policy as an example.
I like oversimplification. Coming from a background, no accounting background for myself personally, this is all like new. And yeah, that was a really, really good example of just how many pieces there are to making sure that these processes work and things that you wouldn't even think of, but you're dealing with one of the most important aspects of your business, which is your money, your finances. So that's really
right. And honestly, it can sound overwhelming when you look at, you could have dozens of policies theoretically if you really wanted to, but breaking it down to what are the most important policies, and just looking at it one at a time, or expanding the team, making sure that the team around you, the professionals you work with, I'm sure they're always willing to lend a hand. I know we've done that quite a bit. Shameless plug, but it's one of those things that you're not alone in this fight. That just taking that simple step back, coming up with a plan for how you're going to establish what these policies and procedures are, is the most simple way to make sure it's not overwhelming.
That's really helpful. It's understanding the why, but then you're there to kind of help with the how and dig into a few more of like the strategic, actually how you implement it, correct?
Exactly.
Cool.
But, don't forget the team you have in-house as well. Everyone has a part to play. And, when I was in Techland, one of the things we did was just daily stand-ups. So what that means is you get the whole team together and everyone's got 15 seconds to say, what are you working on? What are you working on? And you go around the room and everyone has just that moment to briefly explain what's going on. And that's a great way to always, one, have great communication, and two, just have a better understanding what the entire team does.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So we'll move on to the next question. But if anyone has questions still around proper documentation on policies and procedures that we didn't cover, just pop them into the question and answer section and we will answer them at the end of the webinar. So next topic,
and there's a lot to break down there. There's no question about it. That was just the very tip to get through.
Absolutely.
So if we're talking about trying to minimize the risk of fines here, that's a very loaded type of question, or topic, I should say. So it really depends state by state, market by market, in some cases municipality by municipality. And that's not even getting into the major issue of the U.S. federal government and the fact that technically this is still illegal for all intents and purposes. So there's one or two things here to unpack. The most important thing I would say, though, is you're still operating a business. So you still have to file your tax returns. You still have to do the basics here. But Steph, any thoughts from your side on this one?
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about what you need to know to understand the risk of fines or audits from authorities. It's such a big topic, but no one wants to be fined. So how are some ways that we can avoid it and learn things about that?
First and foremost, research. So if you're in the process of getting a dispensary license, make sure you've done your homework, or at least you have someone that you trust that is knowledgeable about what forms need to be filed, what the application process is, what authorities you need to keep in mind. I know we have this of your compliance landscape. So ultimately, what does that mean? So it means making sure that you understand the who, the what, the where, the when, the why, the how. And in the most technical sense, that means that you're filing your tax returns. And again, given that this is retail, now you have sales tax to worry about, which end of the day, that's sales tax collected is never your money. To be blunt about it, you're collecting that on behalf of the state or local government, and you're holding it for them. And then every month or every quarter, you're submitting it back to them. And you have to make sure that you're filing those reports. Not always the easiest thing in the world to do. And listen, there's good POS systems out there. There's good software and such. And there's plenty of bad software, let's be honest. And the cannabis industry is slowly catching up on that front. But it's really important to keep on top of, I would say, the little things like that, but this is actually a very big thing. Even taking that a step further, you look at a more complicated state like California, for example. Every municipality is different in what the requirements are. I'll give a good example. We have a client out of Oakland who's looking to expand just across the bay into San Francisco. And it's a whole different ballgame from one side to the other. There's additional filing requirements, there's additional licensure, et cetera, et cetera. So just understand what the limits are, whether it's geography, whether it's inventory that you can sell, whether it's delivery. So the one interesting thing to come out of COVID was the opening up of the possibility of delivery as a retail operation. Before you buy that car, before you get that driver ready to go, before you download the app, whichever app it might be, make sure that you understand everything that comes with it. Do you need an extra license? Some states yes, some states no. Are there additional filing requirements? Again, some states yes, some no. That's just what makes this, let's say, a lot of fun. Question mark on that one, but it does make for a lot of areas where, should you miss a filing, it can be an issue.
I would say it's a lot of fun if you understand the landscape, but if you don't, it sounds very daunting for sure. Did you say that within the same state, there's different regulations in different municipalities? That's
correct. So using an overcomplicated state, no offense, like California, if anybody from the state is listening, big fan. But yes, looking at Los Angeles versus San Francisco versus Oakland versus San Diego, et cetera, there are different rules, there's different tax rates, there's different requirements across the board. So that's where it's really important to just make sure you have an idea. It's that simple. So do your research there. This is the ironic part. The public level databases are not great. So you really, really need to scratch down through the surface. Make sure you know, again, what the license that you currently have or applying for entitles you to. And then if you want to take it to that extra level, or you want to expand, or whatever it might be, just do the research, or call someone who's familiar with that market.
So just to clarify, you would acquire the license for your municipality, and do they share like the information about what you can do under that license with you, or do you have to dig for that information as well?
No, that should be readily available. So let's just say you get your dispensary license. That'll tell you exactly what it entitles you to, no more, no less.
Okay, but if you were to serve like even your product or expand your operation to a different even municipality, you would have to like look into the different licenses and regulations around the specific one.
Exactly. So let's just say, and again, taking a step back, moving state level geography out of it, let's just say that you have a dispensary and you want to start delivering to the surrounding area. You need to make explicitly sure that, one, you have the ability to legally do that, because nobody wants to be charged with trafficking or any sort of anything going down that road. I don't think anyone's interested in having those things pop up. And two, making sure, okay, you have that ability. So where can you deliver? And that's typically, just do a zip code search. It's, again, theoretically should be that straightforward. If there's any uncertainty at all, call the local governing board or call the state level governing board. They should be able to point you in the right direction.
That's really helpful. There's a great resource then, the state level governing board. Is it different in every state, like in terms of?
It sure is.
Of course it is. Wow. So different places, maybe the whole state is the same, maybe it's municipality. Is that like the geographic regions change? Is that correct?
Well, if you had to put a general rule, and this is not 100%, but just a general rule to think about, you're going to have your state level tax. So you're going to have sales tax, you're going to have excise tax or cannabis business tax, depending on, there's different tax levels to think about. I'll give Illinois as an example. If I forgot off the top of my head how many different routes there are as far as what specific type of transaction on a individual level, what taxes are applied to it, but it can be significant. So ultimately, making sure that there's the sales tax that can be state, can be local, and that a lot of the legislation allows for a little bit of room there. So again, if it's 15% total, then it could be 13% to the state, 2% to the local, or really any derivative thereof. And then there's all, if you're a veteran owner, there's potentially a different structure for that. If you're a women-owned or minority-owned business, there's another structure there, et cetera, et cetera. So very rarely is it like another retail operation where, you're selling something in New York, sales tax is 8.75%, you're good to go. It's very rarely that easy.
Okay, so there's different regulations in different states, different municipalities, and then there's different like tax filings within different like states, municipalities, and within like demographic pieces as well.
Correct. But that's not consistent across every state yet. That's only if you're lucky to be in a state like Illinois or a lot of the northeastern states that are going down that road.
Okay, wow. Just for fun, everyone who is listening, if you could type the state in which you're located into the chat box, I would be curious to know. So yeah, what forms do you have to file? And I imagine this is a question that has a lot of variety, but is there like one basic framework that we can start with, or not?
File your tax returns at federal and state. So let's put it this way. One of the nuances to this industry that to theoretically traffic in cannabis is, illegal for the fact that it's a Schedule I drug. However, the fact that you're making money, the government is very interested in that. So to be frank, we've dealt with quite a few dispensaries that we've had to sort of go back in time, file tax returns for prior years just to get them fully compliant with the current year. and then making sure that they're filing properly going forward. The two biggest areas where we've seen that as an issue, again, income tax and sales tax. At the end of the day, you're an operating business. It's something you just got to consider. The other side, when it comes to seed-to-sale systems, making sure that the proper reporting is going to the state level government. I'm sure if you're on this call, you're familiar, but just as a quick refresher, seed-to-sale system basically means from the time the cultivator puts the seed into the ground through, as a retailer, you sell it to the end consumer. That has to be tracked by the government all the way through. And there's a system like Metric, for example, BioTrack. There's a few that are out there. They're varying levels of ease of use and quality functionality, but that's another story. Just areas you need to make sure that those are up and running and that you can properly file, that you're ready for an audit should the governmental authority want to come in. So I know that's not necessarily forms that are being filed, but again, these governmental authorities do have the right to come in and inspect the grounds, take a look through the operations. It's just good to be ready for something like that and for it to be as amicable as possible, which I know sounds crazy, but you don't want them to be the enemy. And frankly, they aren't. They just want to make sure that it's a nice, clean operation. And I think we're all on the same page on that front.
Yeah. Staying compliant, another key piece in reducing the risk of fines, I would say absolutely. And I know a lot of these seed to sale are compliancy tracking systems are also integrating with some POS systems. So there's like the all-in-one option to just be able to have it all in one, so you don't have to manually calculate the tracking, but tracking, so important. Awesome.
Exactly. And it's good for business. I mean, that means that you're filing your taxes on time, which, again, paying taxes, I know it's not everybody's favorite. However, if you're paying timely, if you're limiting the penalties and interest on that part, that means that there's more funds for operation, for expansion, for doing things that you would rather do instead of giving an additional penny to the government that you don't necessarily have to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know in terms of software as well, that is something that KayaPush does offer in some states in terms of payroll and remitting taxes and calculating deductions and all those different calculations. And then the seed to sale tracking compliance software is also important. Was there any other software that we should touch on to help protect business owners in this realm?
Well, you just hit on one of the areas that I was just thinking about that we hadn't talked about yet, and that is payroll. And making sure payroll taxes are properly filed. And this may seem like another silly area that gets overlooked, and it is. It's, again, you're operating a regular business. You should keep in mind the 1099 rules, which are standard. There's something called the 1099 test. So it's a way that the government sort of enforces you to make sure you're paying the proper payroll taxes, that you can't just call someone a contractor for reasons. You need to have substantive reasons to do so. It's just something interesting to keep in mind.
I think
KayaPush is a great way to think about it. I see something coming in, Form 8300. Great point to bring up. So given that this is a cash-intensive industry, I see we have the follow-up explanation there as well, which is helpful. So basically, if you have $10,000 coming in cash in a single or related transaction, you have to report it to the government. It's purely an informational form, but it's something that we've actually seen quite a few cannabis clients get in trouble for. There was actually a group, and we'll keep names out of this, of course, but based out of Denver, that actually lost their licenses to their dispensaries because they didn't file the forms. There's no tax that comes with it. There's no, other than it being kind of a pain to collect certain information, because you do need identifying information for who the party is. It's informational. So at the end of the day, I think ultimately file the form. It saves you from a lot of trouble. Takes a moment to fill out. It's low-hanging fruit ultimately.
So if someone comes in and spends $10,000 in cash at your dispensary, you have to fill out a form and report it, essentially?
Correct. And it's not necessarily doesn't have to be one individual transaction. If for any 30-day period, it gets to that threshold. then you
Okay.
have to report it.
I was going to ask because I thought that there were, like, within some tracking systems, there were limits on how much people could purchase at a time. So,
That's right.
okay. So that would be if, like,
But if
over a period of time, you got to 10,000 in cash from different people.
right, or if you know, if as maybe not necessarily dispensary, but if you're at that mid-tier level, um, there's significant transactions. So you're buying inventory or something to that effect. You do need to make sure that you're covered there. So it's another matter of bookkeeping and making sure that you're being compliant.
Oh, okay. There's so many things that you don't know that you need to know. Right? Like,
Oh yes.
start. Awesome. Okay, so I think is there anything else we should cover? I know there's like so much we could cover about all of these
I
topics.
was going to say, yeah, we could talk about this for the next 2 hours, but I know there's a couple of things we want to get into.
Yeah. Okay. So I know we were talking a little bit earlier about taxes. Taxes seem very confusing to me. And I love, there's some software that can help and things like that, but there's so much more to know in terms of, especially the cannabis industry specifically. So can you chat a little bit about, like, are taxes more complicated in the cannabis industry? What do we need to know?
Oh boy, are they? And again, that's another 2-hour conversation in its own right. But if we want to slightly oversimplify what's an extremely complex and frankly sometimes frustrating conversation, the cannabis industry is governed by really what was it, 3-4 sentences, and it's Internal Revenue Code subsection 280E, which summed up basically states that because cannabis is a Schedule One drug, and this is not, it doesn't call cannabis necessarily specifically, but because it's a Schedule One drug, it does fall under this subsection. You cannot take any deductions for the business. So what that means is, unless it's cost of goods sold, and again, that circles back to proper documentation. How do you allocate cost of goods sold? That's why this is really important. You're not taking that deduction. So I'll give a nice, easy example. Let's just say you make $100 in sales. The cost of inventory, which cost of goods sold for all intents and purposes, is $30. So you have $70 in operating income then. So for all intents and purposes, this or any other industry, and you have another $30 in operating expenses, now you're looking at bottom line of, let's say, 70, 30. Now you're looking at another $40 at the bottom line. So again, any other industry, you're taxed at that $40. However, because this is cannabis, because you're falling under 280E, you're actually taxed at that upper level, at that $70. So anything that's in that bottom section is out. So that's your rent, that's your marketing, that's personnel costs. I mean, all pretty significant expenditures that you cannot take any deductions for, which can be a little frustrating, honestly. But again, those are the rules, and those are the most important rules to be aware of. Now, at the state level, there can be some nuance to that. So theoretically, a state could decouple from the Internal Revenue Code for those purposes. It can happen. And there's sometimes add backs or sometimes additional areas that you need to be aware of. And I'm happy to discuss those nuances on a state-by-state level. But that might be a bit too far down the rabbit hole for right now. But ultimately, this is where you really need to be careful. There's always bad players out there that will try to make a quick buck and say that, oh, well, you can do this, you can do that. No. I can tell you, it's not worth the trouble. It's not worth putting your license at risk. It's not worth putting your business at risk for what is ultimately a short-term gain.
Yeah.
And not in the tax sense, in the more literal sense. But that's probably the best advice I could give, is don't go for that quick solution, that quick fix. It's not worth it.
That's good advice. This would be an edgy question. Do you see that changing if cannabis were to be federally, like, legalized in a sense, or the regulation were to change?
So 280E itself is never going away, but as far as cannabis being descheduled and handled differently by the government, it's not if, it's when. However, I don't think that's going to be coming up anytime soon. I think there's too many hurdles to get through. There's too many complications, and to speak frankly about it, the federal government makes too much money. So as soon as you can prove that the government will make $1 more from having a legally operating structure and not being governed by 280E, I think it happens pretty quick. But we're just not there yet.
Right. Yeah, that's good insight. And then back to speaking about the 280E, is every legal state, I think you said it was different state by state. Is it significantly different? How would you find out where you sit within that realm?
So each state does have its own Department of Revenue, Department of Taxation. There's some nuances to the naming conventions there, but they actually do have it right now. If you want a great way to go to sleep quickly, that's a fantastic read. But that's something where we can definitely have a conversation and state by state go through what some of the nuances are. Again, to oversimplify a little bit, there's really not too many areas you need to be concerned about. Again, this is speaking very high level. If you want to think about it simply, then look at it the same way as the federal government, and anything that you can either add back or deduct is gravy from there.
Got it. So how would you recommend that business owners or dispensary owners manage the tax situation?
Oh, plan. I know planning is key there. If I could put that in 72 font and make it take up the whole screen, I would, because that is so incredibly important. Nobody wants to be surprised by a tax bill. Let's be honest. And when we're going through the financial modeling for the application process, that's typically the biggest line item that you'll see is just taxation, a big number. I'm not going to lie about it. The effective tax rates can be significant. And just to explain that quickly, if you have a C Corp, for example, it's flat 21% for now, probably changing in the near future, but just for sake of this discussion at this moment in time, 21%. Now, the question you need to ask is 21% of what? And that's where that 280E conversation comes in. That's where not getting those deductions can really hit. So 21% of that $70 from the example I mentioned before is a lot different than $30. So that's where planning really comes into play. And what we do typically, and good accountants, good financial planners and such will lay this out for you, where this is how much we know you've made year to date now. These are the associated goods sold, these are associated operating expenses that we see. This is your cash flow right now. This is what we expect as of today your tax bill is going to be. Let's see what we can do about paying in a little bit or putting aside a reserve. And then that allows us to make sure that we're not going to get hit by a big tax bill at the end. And we've run into that so many times where, frankly, owners are surprised by the tax bill at the end of the year. And it becomes a pretty significant issue trying to get that cash together. And I do mean cash in the most literal sense, because there's really no way around it. You have to pay the tax one way or another.
Yeah.
So as I said, plan.
That could definitely sink a ship, a huge unexpected expense. Are there other unique taxation rules or regulations that are unique to the cannabis industry that business owners, dispensary owners might want to be aware of or have in mind?
Well, 280 is certainly the biggest one. And we've only scratched the surface on that as well. Now, other areas you need to be just aware of, depending on where you're on the vertical. But if we're speaking just as dispensary owners, again, making sure sales tax filings are done correctly, that proper amounts are withheld. If there's an under collection, for example, which, given that the rules are a little different than any other retail operation in another industry, it can happen. It has happened, and sometimes that can sneak up on you a little bit. So again, planning for that, making sure that the proper calculations are done, being aware of any local cannabis business taxes, certainly an area that is of concern if you're not properly educated or someone isn't properly handling that and filing that. And then from there, it's just making sure that as a business, you're fully compliant, as we said before.
Awesome. And then paying your employees. I know that that's a side that the payroll software can help with. Paying employees and having the proper taxes and tax deductions on that is another important piece, but doesn't get as into like all the line items and all the different operating costs and things like that. So is it like a marriage between?
One thing, if you talk about, just to amend to that, one area that we've seen that's very unique is how a receipt has to be listed out when you give it to a customer. So there's actually a specific order and there's a specific, just certain guidelines you have to give. There's certain disclosures that have to be there. And again, it's a little different state by state. We mentioned Illinois, but we also want to make sure that, if you're in California, for example, oh boy, there's a specific order, there's a specific format that it has to be in. And just one other area as well that I think people need to be aware of, there's no federal tax credits. So don't waste your time with R&D tax credits. Don't be too concerned with any of the other tax credits that may or may not be advertised out there. And I think we've all seen the emails go around. We've all heard the phone calls, the articles on LinkedIn and other places where, submit for this, you can get it. Don't worry about it that your cannabis will get around that. No. First of all, you never ever want to lie in a tax form or say something that may not be necessarily untrue. So we've seen plenty of groups get into trouble for maybe having a generic entity name and trying to claim a specific tax credit. It's not worth it, honestly. At the end of the day, they will catch up. May not be today, may not be tomorrow, but they have 7 years plus to figure it out, and they will. So I can't recommend enough to try and stay on the straight and narrow and try to play by the rules on this. It will get better, I promise. It will get easier, but for right now, it's just not worth the risk in my mind.
Don't do it, guys. Zachary knows what he's talking about. It's very nice. Even if the temptation's there. And planning.
Exactly. And I know I've had clients that have seen very convincing emails. But, 280E doesn't apply to you because, blah, 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 because we said so, because we found an out of context excerpt from something in the Internal Revenue Code that says XYZ. I can tell you right now, the IRS will poke a hole in that. You'll wind up in tax court. You'll wind up owing more tax than you would have otherwise, plus penalties and interest. It's not worth winding up on the naughty list.
That's good advice. Anything else on tax laws? I know there is, but that we.
I was going to say, all right.
Within this hour-long
Sure.
webinar, anything else?
Right.
That's like you might not know that you need to know, which I think are some things that like business owners can then dig into more, or anything that again, like super high risk, this is important to just have top of mind, or do we cover it?
The only other thing, and again, there's a million different topics we can get into and just so many different nuances to consider. But the only other thing I will say here is good books and records really make a difference. So, I don't have any particular loyalty to any specific accounting software, but find one that works for you. I think we're all familiar with some of the bigger players in the industry, but make sure you have books and records. Make sure they're as clean as possible. Or, if you're not sure what to do, there's always people out there who are happy to help. That just makes this whole process much easier as well.
Awesome. Okay, on to the next topic and final topic before we get into the question and answer section. So how can people use data to boost profits at their dispensary?
So this is actually a lot of fun. So I do come from a bit of a tech background in addition to accounting and finance and all that. It's been an interesting journey. But this is what's really cool. This is what's a little more nuanced. And these are some things that every business has in front of them, whether they realize it or not. So if you have that accounting software, if you have that inventory management software, if you have an Excel file, you have data. You're collecting data from patrons that come in. You're collecting data from vendors, from the bank, just day to day. You have every piece of information you could ever want, even if you don't even know it's there. So that's really cool. I'll be honest. That's a great way to really figure out how you're doing. And that's a broad statement, but ultimately it's one that just a lot of business owners, and especially in this industry, they have a tough time really differentiating between, what's a good year, what's a bad year, what's a good day, what's a bad day, etc. I'll give you a good example. What strain is selling the best? You should be able to answer that in a split second. And it's not always that easy, but the tools are there, the data's there. And this is where we really get to nerd out as accountants, as data people, and get to answer those questions. And it's fun to be able to not just be the tax person, not just be the historian, so to speak, but to be able to actually help make a substantive decision for an operating business and help to look forward. And that's just really cool.
Very cool. And that's something like Grassi can do and help like dispensary owners find and locate and streamline.
Exactly. So there's all sorts of tools out there that you can use to aggregate data from different areas, different databases, different software. So whether that's using something like a Power BI to just bring everything in, or whether it's doing the research into a specific piece of software and seeing, okay, is there an API available? So can we set up a bridge where we're automatically pulling all that information and sending it to whether it's a dashboard, whether it's reporting automatically, et cetera, et cetera. There's really interesting and automated tools that are available. And again, that's really cool. I can't emphasize that enough.
I love integrated programs and things that pull numbers together and show you information. Not only does it save so much time and help you make such better data-driven and staffing and scheduling and inventory decisions, but it's also more accurate than if you were to do it manually, because crunching the numbers could, if you were to make a mistake, it could definitely affect your bottom line.
No question. And, top level numbers might be great. You might be doing a fantastic top line revenue number, but when you really break it down, maybe it tells a different story. And that's just really where there's a unique opportunity to do that.
The numbers don't lie, as numbers people say. So that's
they are what they are. It's just a matter of what story do they tell.
What you see is what you get with the numbers.
Right. And you hit on what's a really interesting phrase, and it's one of those really corny ones that I say over and over again, but you want to make data-driven decisions. We're in a time where we don't have to just necessarily go with only our gut or just go with what the market's doing, but take a look and see, as I said a moment ago, what story does the data tell? And how does it help us in making good, smart, data-driven decisions?
Yeah, we know that we're making those.
So there's a lot of really interesting ways to do that. It's really, what are you comfortable with? And you, at the end of the day, as an owner, you don't have to be tech savvy to handle this. If you can open an email or if you can make a phone call, you can figure this stuff out, to be honest.
Yeah. And I know like some platforms, the data lives within the platform, or you can pull the data from two platforms and view it in one platform. If it's like sales versus labor, for example, do you have any other, any thoughts on where business owners could find their data that they would want to use?
Well, I think you hit on what do you want to measure. So there's something called a key performance indicator, KPI. Those are the most important metrics that you can think of. And some of the simple ones, inventory sales, turnover, all the various turnover ratios that you can think about. It's not just net income that you need to think about. It's not just profit that you need to think about, but there's a lot more nuances there. So based on the example I gave before, and that's actually one where we've been able to, if you talk about profit, that's a great area to think about when it comes to inventory management. So to keep it, simple, what's selling and what's not. And customer's always right. If they're not buying something, don't keep getting that inventory refilled. Don't keep going back. Take a look at what the numbers are telling you as far as, okay, well, these 6 strains are selling incredibly well and these 6 are not. So logic will tell you buy more of the 6 that are selling and less of the 6 that aren't. And that's all available. So taking a look at the inventory management software, taking a look at the POS system, and that's where you can really marry the two if they're, assuming they're not already, and take a look and see what stories they're telling.
Yeah, that's awesome. Give the people what they want.
It's that simple. The customer's always right.
The customer's always right. Right on.
And they will tell you if you're doing a good job or a bad job. So couldn't put it any more simply than that.
That's awesome. Cool. And why would you say this is like really important, this key piece here? I know it's one of the most important pieces. What is your take on why it's so important?
How you run your business. It's how you keep the lights on. It's how you make sure that, a year from now, 2 years, 10 years from now, things are still going. And this is a constantly evolving area, but that's a good thing. So that means that the technology is getting easier to use, is getting cheaper, most importantly. I can tell you that the cost to set up this type of analytics platform is a fraction of what it was a couple of years ago. And it's so much easier. And, again, no particular loyalty to any company, but I can say that a company like Intuit, for example, which owns QuickBooks, they've actually opened up their back. And this is not just a cannabis conversation, but it's just a general conversation, especially given that they're not huge fans of the cannabis industry. That's another story. But they've actually opened up their back end for developers to go in and be able to set up things like bots to write scripts to extract certain pieces of data or to push in data. There's all sorts of developer tools now that are available across so many different platforms. And if there's a platform you use or want to use, call them up. I'll be honest, I've done it quite a few times where maybe they didn't exactly have documentation or information available publicly. We just called them up, and they were more than happy. They're actually pretty excited to go down an endeavor like this. So if there's something you don't see on the market, start ringing some bells and see who answers.
I love that. That's such great advice. And it's so true in such a new and evolving industry. I know like in the technology sector, we like love learning about what different cannabis business owners need. And it could be very unique from state to state or business to business, and just getting the customer feedback and finding out how to help people run their business better and get them the data that they need is something that all technology people want to learn about so they can make better products and help people succeed.
Exactly. And you guys are a great example of that, actually, of actually listening to what people want. And I said, anybody listening, I genuinely don't mean this as a plug. I actually do truly believe this, that you guys have done a great job of actually listening to what feedback there's been and making the adjustments as necessary, which is just awesome and not done enough.
Hey, thanks so much. So now we have covered all the different topics. We're going to open up the question and answer section. I'm going to leave this on here while I do a recap of the different sections that we covered. And if you want to contact either one of us, this is our contact information. Again, come and visit us at MJBizCon. And we're also going to be sending a follow-up email with the webinar replay and a link if you want to book a consultation with Zachary to get more insights on these services or to use his insights to help you run a better dispensary. So what we covered today was how to keep proper documentation on policies and procedures, how to minimize the risk of fines and penalties. We went over an overview of unique ways taxation works in cannabis industry. And we also covered how to make profit boosting data-driven decisions based on existing information and technology. So now we're going to jump into the question and answer period. Thank you so much. If we have any questions around all these things, please put them in the question area, and we'll get to as many as we can. We already have a few that have come in right now, so I'm going to start with those. So let's start the question and answer. Before we start, is there anything else that you wanted to say, Zachary, on in terms of contacting or the consultation or anything like that?
No, I think we've covered a ton, and I think I want to stop myself too much from making this another hour, since I know we only have a couple minutes left. So, again, any questions anyone has, and anything that really sticks out, always happy to pick up the phone or answer an email or a message. So, yeah, feel free to fire away anytime.
Awesome. And without further ado, I have 4 questions that have already come in here. So I'll just jump to these ones. And then if we have any other ones that come in, we'll check the time and see. All right. So question 1 is, what federal cannabis legislation is out there right now?
Oh, man, that's interesting. So there's a couple that are actually very important and have been tried to push through Congress to get approved a few different times. So first and foremost being the Safe Banking Act. And that doesn't necessarily open up the floodgates for banking, which is a pretty significant issue for the cannabis industry, but it does provide guidance. And at the end of the day, as a bank, that's what they need. So there are some small and mid-tier banks that have gotten into it. There are some big banks that don't know they're in it, but they are. I don't recommend going down that route, but ultimately, if it can get through, it provides additional guidance, which is very, very necessary. And as a finance professional, any bit of rules and any sort of framework that we can get is much appreciated. There was legislation put through the States Act, so basically that protects an individual state. Basically means that the federal government's not going to interfere with a legally operating market. That's a pretty big deal as well. And I know there's a few others that have been pushed through, decriminalization bill, et cetera. But I think there's a lot more work to be done on that front.
Nice. And on that note, in terms of chatting about banking, that's actually is a good segue into the next question. Can I use a bank if I have a cannabis company?
Maybe. So there's no straight answers here. Let's be honest. It really depends bank by bank. So there's a big misconception that it's illegal for banks to operate in the industry. It's technically not. However, there's reporting standards that they have to maintain. There's an internal control framework that they have to have properly set up. The compliance for them is, in a word, significant. Now that's not good, bad, or otherwise. It just is for now until Safe Banking Act is passed, until there's further movement on that front. What I would say, I just sort of danced around a little bit a moment ago, if you're using one of the big banks, if you have accounts in those banks, like let's just Chase or Wells Fargo, Bank of America, whatever it might be, any of the bigger names, they are a no-go. Now, again, if you have an entity, for example, that's just, it doesn't say cannabis, doesn't say green, doesn't say any of the typical trigger words you would see, if it's just ABC Company LLC, then if you have a good relationship with your local banker and they don't ask too many questions, they're never going to know until they do, because those banks have KYC processes work in the background. They have bots. They have entire departments that are looking for things like this. Why do I bring that up? Because if you get caught, all your accounts can get shut down. Basically, they will hand you a cashier's check for whatever's in your accounts and tell you to have a nice day, or maybe they won't even say that. Basically, they'll just say get out. And there's additional danger there if you have a mortgage or any other type of debt. Theoretically, they could call that debt. So I would be very hesitant to try to play those games. There are plenty of banks, and again, I can certainly recommend a few depending on where in the country you are. But ask the right questions. Make sure that you're doing your homework on that front as well. Just like with everything else in this industry.
That might be something that we can chat about or share with people in a follow-up email, is recommendations that you have. I know that a lot of clients who connect with KayaPush have challenges finding a good fit for them. So jumping in, and this is one that I can speak a little bit to as well. Any recommendations for how to more efficiently run my operations? I know on the KayaPush side, in terms of people management, the integrated system that we provide that has HR, payroll, scheduling, and time tracking is a really great way to efficiently run an operation because, again, everything's integrated. We love data, and you can do things like approve clocked hours of people clocking in with facial recognition technology, which is also great for compliance. And then you can press approve hours. You can even automate approved hours so people aren't able to clock in early or out late. And then you can directly streamline those to payroll. So payroll is essentially done. All you have to do is click run payroll. All the calculations are done ahead of time. And then same with taxations. It also does a lot of calculations there. And also on the operations side and labor management side, integrating with POS systems. So there are a few of the most popular POS systems in the dispensary ecosystem that we integrate with. So you're able to pull labor versus sales reports so you can make better scheduling decisions. And that information is also shared with technology to help you create schedules based on labor forecasts. So again, like having the data, making smart decisions, and just having things be streamlined and integrated is on my end a great way to run operations more efficiently. What about your thoughts, Zachary?
Honestly, I would say you actually hit on a pretty key area because, again, the ADPs, the Paychecks of the world, they're not really fans yet of the industry. So personnel, it's one of, if not the largest cost that you're going to have running a business. So yeah, you need to make sure that you're on top of your game there. And it's tough to find a good technology partner that can handle all these different things. So I would definitely highlight it as a major area. And I know we talked about other things. Get a good accounting software. I know I'm biased given, my background, but good accounting software can make all the difference in the world, especially when it comes to making sure that you're filing taxes properly, that you have access to all that information should you need it. And if you're looking to take an investment, if you're looking to continue business expansion, it makes all the difference.
Nice. Okay. Next question. Back to taxes and accounting software, a good segue. What if I haven't filed tax returns for my cannabis business before? What do you do?
Call quickly. So that's the best way I can put it. It happens. And again, this is not unique to the cannabis industry, but I would highly, highly recommend getting on it as soon as possible. So let's be honest, we've gone as far back as 2015, 2016, et cetera, just this year, and going back and making sure that things are filed. And I'll give a good example. We had a client out of California, actually, that, well, let's just say they had a business partner who was not holding up their end of the shareholder agreement. And long story short, they never actually filed returns dating back to 2011, and they were being audited. So we had to very quickly go through all the books and records, get everything together, and file everything, pay back taxes, pay significant fines and penalties, and get it done. It wasn't the most pleasant of processes, but it's got to be done. And the longer you wait, again, to speak frankly, the worse it gets. So if it's a problem, let's talk it out. And again, misconception about the IRS, they can be negotiated with. You can speak to them. They will play ball, so to speak, but can't hide from them. You just need to be a part of the process, to be as diligent as possible in getting filings done.
And planning.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay, I have two more questions. This one is quite specific. So, with regard to the 280E and a business operating as a DBA to an LLC, are we responsible for taxation based on gross revenue after cost of goods sold, and then responsible to taxation based on income we may take out at the end of the year relative to the income of the owners of the LLC. Does that make sense?
So, David, there's a couple of things to unpack there, and to there's some nuance to that, and there's potentially some curveballs. But if it's an LLC, if it is a true pass-through entity, then the owners of that LLC would be getting a K-1 with whatever their appropriate distributor share of the net income or loss of any of the other various, there's interest income, if there was guaranteed payments made, et cetera. There's, that's what gets passed through. Now, what additionally you're talking about, and this gets into a very, very specific conversation. Now we're talking about tax basis. And I don't want to put everybody to sleep, but basically, we would need to take a look historically at who took what, at what the contributions and distributions were. There's quite a bit to unpack there. So I would definitely want to talk about that a bit more specifically. But at the highest level, in a typical case, if it's an LLC, we're only, for 280 purposes, again, to oversimplify, we're only looking at that gross revenue after cost of goods sold, with some, slight nuance to that, of course.
There you are. And then final question. I'm not sure if this one is really tax related, but the question is, does the cannabis delivery person need to be a certified cannabis employee? And this is a question from someone in Ontario. Do you know? So
I wouldn't want to speak out of turn on that. I would want to properly research that before answering. Not to sidestep the question, but I'm a little less familiar on the Canadian side as far as regs are concerned, specifically when it comes to being a certified cannabis employee. So happy to take a look at that, but I want to follow up first.
And certified cannabis employees in the States, is that anyone who works within the industry would have to be certified? Yeah, in the States.
Correct. Now, typically what we would recommend is, background checks are done, just going through the typical employee onboarding process, which I'm sure that the KayaPush platform is more than capable of handling, but to date, it's not an issue in the U.S.
Yeah. We have digitization of those documents, and then they just go into the software, and it all gets kept on file. So in terms of a certified employee, again, great for compliance. You're able to see within the platform that the employees have filled out these forms and that the licenses are up to date, etc.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I don't see any other questions, and it's 11:11, which I feel like is a magical time to complete our webinar. Anything else from your end today, Zachary?
Oh, no, one, this has been a lot of fun. I'm really glad we could chat about some pretty interesting topics and pretty wide ranging. But two, I think if I had to have some final words, just write everything down. And no matter how silly it might seem, write it down. Make sure you have clean books and records, as clean as possible. Nothing has to be perfect, but just make sure you're taking everything in as far as financial and operational data is concerned. And file your taxes.
Awesome. I learned so much today, honestly. Thank you so much. I feel like I know so much more about this side of the industry now, so I really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks so much for joining us and sharing all your insights and your expertise with the audience here.
Of course, always happy to.
Awesome. Well, that's all for now, and we will chat with you very soon. I'll see you at MJ BizCon.
That's right. We'll see you out there.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for joining, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.